Awesome. Thanks so much for the intro. And hey, thanks everyone for spending some time on your Friday morning with us. Hopefully, I mean it's a pretty audacious title there, the most overlooked thing, but hopefully we'll kind of justify where maybe that title comes from as we go. I'll share my screen real quick because you can't really have a talk without a PowerPoint deck. I think that's kind of like critical to every single thing all over, right? Hey, so again, hopefully this will be a good time together. Let's quickly do a little bit of intros here, just so you know who's talking up here as we go. So I'm Danny Presten. I have one of those crazy job titles. You ever read those things where they say like most jobs in 10 years that you're going to be doing don't even exist today? I have one of those kind of job titles where I'm the chief methodologist for Digital.ai. Which really means I help companies kind of get out and achieve their key goals, especially around their ways of working, kind of the methodology around that, and have a lot of fun doing that. Let me pass the mic over to Jackie. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
I currently work at Pfizer. For those of you who aren't local to the Atlanta area, it's not Pfizer, the medical company. It's actually spelled Fiserv. My title there is Director of Business Transformation, but I consider myself an agilist and a coach first and foremost. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here and to be talking about this topic. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm excited.
Awesome. And if you guys have a pulse and you've been in the Atlanta area, like, more than a year, you probably have heard of Jackie. She's kind of like a key person involved in the community, building out a lot of different ways to participate and all that kind of cool stuff. So we'll get more into that as we go. But thank you, Jackie, for being able to join. Really glad to have you here having this conversation together. And then last in our introductions, but certainly not least, is MC Moore, who looks way cooler in person than he does in this stodgy old picture here. So MC, you want to kind of introduce yourself a bit there?
Good morning, all. Great to be here with you all, and thank you all for taking out time to be with us. My name is MC Moore. I was a senior Scrum Master with IHG, Intercontinental Hotels Group, until here recently. I love what I do, but the pandemic has impacted the hospitality industry and IHG in particular. I was furloughed, then laid off. So, hey guys, I'm on the market. I'm out here, I'm looking.
Yeah. MC is one of the COVID casualties that has come up. But I've personally hung out with MC for a couple of years now and have done some communities of practice with him. MC, what was about a year ago, we had a Scrum Master 101 community that lasted about 6 weeks, which was a lot of fun, just kind of doing that with you. And again, if you've been in the Atlanta area for a while and have happened to attended any kind of a meetup or conference or something like that, I'm sure you've seen MC around, generally in some kind of a leadership role in that one. So great to have both of y'all here today. And what I'm hoping for folks that are listening in, or yeah, I guess you can only listen, but I'm hoping to have more of a conversation as we go. And that's like a key thing. I think conversations are critical overall. And especially if you're doing a talk about community and how important it is, you just can't do that by yourself. There's like rules against that, I think. So the goal there is that we have a conversation. Given the platform, this is a Zoom webinar kind of platform. So it's impossible, I think, for participants to share their video or to unmute their mic. But we do have a chat feature. And MC and Jackie, I'm having a hard time seeing the chat and seeing the screens when I'm sharing all that. If you happen to have two monitors and can just interrupt anytime somebody has something on the chat that's relevant, go ahead and do that. But that's where I'm hoping that we can get you guys to actually have a conversation here. Now, building into this, let me talk a little bit about what we want to talk about. As we were scratching our head on this one, I think this is one of those talks that if you're like expecting an entirely new perspective in your world to challenge your current paradigm of community and recreate the word and all that kind of stuff, this is probably not going to be that talk. What I think the value out of this one, hopefully you're going to get, is that you're going to just remember how important community actually is. And maybe if you've been putting it on the back burner, you'll have some practical handles about how you can actually put that more on a front burner where it needs to be. And then also learn from some of our mistakes along the way as we kind of get into telling stories. But but even bigger than that, dreaming about hypothesis, experiments, things like that, that you can run to continue to bolster this much needed part of your life. So we'll kind of go through a bit of a journey here and begin starting talking about why it's so important, what some of the challenges are that we found as it relates to community, both good, bad, ugly, all that kind of stuff. In our experience, what's work, not work, like hopefully we can accelerate your journey just a bit. And then we'll kind of round out the talk with some practical takeaways. And you guys might be able to provide even more through the chat feature or through Slack after the talk. Our plan is, as presenters, to pay attention to the chat as we're, the link, the Zoom chat, as we're going through the talk, and then we'll pay attention to the Slack channel after, just so you know, we can't totally divide our thing and do two things at once. So if you would help us out during the talk, if you have questions, things you want us to address, hit it in the Zoom chat. After the talk, we'll be all on the Slack channel after that. Sound cool? All right, so how about we rock and roll here and get into talking about why community is so important. And as I was thinking about, like, man, what could I anchor this to really drive the point home? And I've got two kids in high school, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs came to mind. You guys may remember this back from earlier parts of your life, maybe in college psychology class or high school psychology, something like that. But the idea here that Maslow was getting at is like, hey, a lot of your actions are motivated around meeting these core needs, and you've got to meet foundational needs before you meet upper level ones. So Jackie, MC, I'm just throwing this out here for a bit, but as you think about this, whether you're like into the model or not, I know there's a bunch of naysayers in Maslow, but just taking that as an example here, how many of these, what ones of these do you think are met in community? Like, how does this play in your experience with that?
So definitely for me, love and belonging and safety needs. You know, a lot of my community provides, you know, the friendship and the intimacy. And, you know, as far as safety needs, there's been a lot of, you know, professional connection around, you know, employment, finding resources, things like that. So those two really resonate with me when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree that just taking safety first, I think most of the time when people get hired, it's because there's a relationship there. A lot of time, not every time, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the time people want to work with their friends, and you know, there's just a natural propensity to say, hey man, do that. Or even like MC, you know, in a situation where you're kind of between gigs right now and looking for the next one, I imagine that leaning on that community to help generate leads and stuff like that is a key part of the strategy on that one.
Oh, exactly. We took that one step further. There's a great group of folks that were all furloughed with me at IHG, and we built our own community. We have a Slack channel. We get together. We have virtual happy hours every Friday, and we're here for support and networking. So it's been phenomenal, and it's helped to get us through the low spots.
Yeah, and I would contend this isn't something like new to, you know, this decade in history, but this is something that's been a part of history like since history began, right? Like living together in community, being able to specialize in certain things you're good at, lean on other people for things that you're not as good at, work together is kind of just core to our human existence. I would say from what I've seen in my brief arc of history, it seems like people are spending less and less time developing that and maybe having more of a surface level connection across, you know, hundreds and thousands of people instead of a deep connection with a few. But I think this is an entirely important piece of that. Jackie, you mentioned love and belonging. Talk a little bit about that as it relates to community.
I think everybody needs spaces where they have the freedom to bring their true selves to those spaces. And by developing those connections, you know, it really gives you that sense of belonging. I'm the co-organizer of Women in Agile in Atlanta. It's a pretty well-attended meetup. Especially now that we're virtual, we get a lot of people from other areas of the country. And the title itself might sound somewhat exclusive, but really Women in Agile was formed out of women wanting to support each other in encouraging us to show up and be talk hosts and presenters at conferences and contributing to Agile blogs and so on and so forth. So we do have allies, men do attend and present at our meetups, but it is an organization that's for us, and you get that, intimacy, that sense of family and that sense of friendship. So yeah, people want to show up at places where they feel, recognized and connected.
Yeah, and even going up, I think if you're in the audience and you use a little bit of imagination, it wouldn't be hard to imagine community really impacting even the green and the blue layers up there, where it's very meaningful to find, wow, I can bring something to this group of people. I'm not a complete, utter nincompoop, but there's something I have to offer. There's some kind of a strength out there that they don't have. And then there's strengths that they have that I don't have. And we can kind of build off those. And I would contend, I think once I get to the end of my life, I think what's going to matter most are the people that I've invested in, the time that I've spent with them, building them up. And so I think that elusive self-actualization, becoming the most you can be, has a lot to do with becoming the most you can be in the context of helping people around you, being a part of that community. So all that to say, hopefully you're convinced it's really important, but just in case you're not, let's pull out a quote from Mr. Jay-Z. How can you go wrong quoting Jay-Z early on a Friday morning? So Jay-Z would contend we change people through conversation, meaning that you're growing as an individual through conversations. And kind of building on his comment, I'm sure he meant it as it relates to Agile transformations. Since we are an Agile conference, I got to throw that in there. But I would contend most Agile transformations that I see kind of watching from the sidelines, and even some I participated in, kind of have this general thing where you get a whole bunch of stuff spun up. There's a lot of cool activity. You kind of reach a point where it plateaus, and then a lot of times people fall back in their same old ruts. And I would contend people fall back in their ruts because they really don't change. They might have changed their terminology, but they've not changed their thinking. And if you kind of 5 whys that, I think at some point it gets down to they haven't actually engaged in conversations that they find credible to actually challenge their paradigm and create a new paradigm. And I think all that happens in community. A big missing part of Agile transformations that I see in general is a focus on building solid communities of practice, having places where you can have honest discussions. I see a lot of them are like, hey, the coach tells me to do this, so I do it. And, a year after his contract wraps up, we just fall back into whatever ways we were working. So I think even if you take it out of Maslow's kind of this big ethereal kind of thing and you pull it into my day-to-day, like how can I be a better Scrum Master with this team? How can I be a better Agile transformation person in my context, or better product owner, whatever it is? I think forming these kind of communities actually is the key, maybe the only key to helping things improve as you go. Anyone disagree, agree? What do you think? Am I crazy talking?
Yeah,
Feel free to run the chat.
I was just going to add in, I think fatigue kind of plays into this as well. And that sense of community, I know, as we were preparing, we talked about how difficult it is to maintain and keep a community of practice running and focused. But having that in place keeps the new ideas fresh. It gives us opportunities to challenge one another, and avoids that rut that you mentioned there.
Yeah, cool. So let's jump into that conversation here and think through, why, if community is central to the human existence, and I think it's been that way for like many, many centuries, then why isn't this easier? What's going on here? And so as a group, we were just kind of brainstorming some of these things. And again, as an audience participation member, you may have others. Again, feel free to throw those in the chat, and love to kind of talk through those. But Jackie, MC, which of these jump off the page are like relevant in your world?
Oh, definitely. It becomes a chore. Even in this current climate, you would think working from home, you would have more time, but it seems like your day quickly fills up with many, many things to do. So a lot of times, reconnecting with people, reaching out to people, attending a meetup, or being an active member of a community that you once were a part of, it becomes a chore. And it now becomes one of those checkpoints on your to-do list that we as Agilists will deprioritize sometimes, because the rest of the world and the weight of everything else that's going on kind of makes it less of a priority. So yeah, definitely it becomes a chore is one that jumps out at me.
Yeah, absolutely.
The piece that resonates with me is the procrastination. I'll get to it tomorrow. The best laid plans. We know it's out there, and we want to do it, but it's like, oh, we'll get to it tomorrow, and tomorrow just never seems to arrive, you know. And I think one of the things that's kind of brought it home for me is with the pandemic and all, it's really helped to reset some of those priorities, so that because we're not guaranteed tomorrow, and so we do need to strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
Who said, I hear from teams that they are overloaded. Austin actually says, I hear from teams that they are overloaded with work and they don't get much out of it. I'm assuming they don't get much out of the community of practice. I'm assuming that's what that comment is about.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that kind of plays together. Like, you'll get, a lot of times you'll get, that person who kind of has been a Scrum Master for 5 years, and they come to the Scrum Master community practice meeting or whatever, and somebody asks a question about, how do I get a daily stand-up down to just 15 minutes, and you see like the seasoned Scrum Master kind of rolling their eyes like, oh man, do we really have to talk about daily stand-ups again? Come on, people. And I think they're coming at it with this attitude of like, challenge my paradigm, tell me something new. And I've been here for 5 years. So like the amount of things you might have new are going to be a lot smaller, instead of coming at it with an attitude of like, wow, how can I give back to the community, that kind of thing. So when you're looking for something to get out of it, I think oftentimes you may find, there's little nuggets here and there, but by and large, the more you give, the more you get in that. So we can kind of talk through that a bit. The overloaded with work, and I don't want to bother anyone. Maybe I think those two kind of play together, don't they? Like, my day is really full. I'm, all the time running across all these different things. And I imagine everybody else's day is the same way. So, man, I probably will just hold off, wait until tomorrow to ping, catch up with Jackie or catch up with MC, see how they're doing, because they're probably overloaded too. And I don't want to bug them. I don't want to be a pain. But I would say, like, that oftentimes I fall into that thing. It's like, man, everybody's so busy, they probably don't even remember me. I want to hear from me. But never, ever have I had someone reach out to me and I think, whoa, that's so annoying. Why'd they bother me today? Like, someone says like, Austin, good to see you again. I think we were in a safe class together a while ago. And just ping him and say, hey man, it's good to see you again. Like, I did not ever, has anyone ever done that where I thought, wow, man, what are they doing? That's such a pain. I'm right in the middle of something. It's like, no. When we're on the receiving end, we always appreciate it. When we're the initiator though, we kind of always question it. And I'd say, man, that's just kind of silly, like, I don't think anyone's ever felt bugged by somebody reaching out. So yeah, good stuff there. Anything cool come in on the chat on that one? People want to dive into deeper or anything?
I saw another one that says, from Rob, it says, a lot of these stem from the issue of prioritization alignment, from customer to company to department to team to me.
Yeah.
Real there, Rob.
Rob, always bringing the thunder. You're exactly right. I mean, it really comes down to, we're all given this bucket of time. Where do we want to spend it? And I think kind of a key part of this talk is not new information, maybe reminding you of old information, but community needs to be in that list. It needs to be a priority. Heck, it should probably be a lot higher than any of us are making it. And I think that goes for the panelists today. Like, I think we'd all say we probably could invest more in that. Awesome. Cool. So jumping into what's work, not work. And this is an experience report. So I didn't want to like get into like too techie stuff, but I did want to share some of our experiences and kind of spend some time on that. So I want to unpack this slide a little bit. First here in the middle, you'll see a Venn diagram. And up to this point, we haven't really defined community. And heck, we may not do a great job of defining it on this slide, but this is a chance at least to narrow in on that. But I think there's personal community. This is like the friendships that sustain you over time, right? Personal friends, family, that kind of stuff. There's also a professional community. Let's get a bunch of Scrum Masters together and talk about Scrum Mastering. And then there's a workplace community where we spend loads of hours each week interacting with that group. So kind of taking each of those, my hypothesis here is that the more these overlap, the more meaningful they become. So if I have workplace people that actually become a personal friend, it's a more meaningful relationship as I'm starting to overlap that. And very meaningful relationships, like where you go through the forming, storming, norming, and get to like real synergies from being together, or when these begin to really overlap a lot, where I've got personal friends that I'm working with and we're also trying to develop as professionals, like all that together. So that's kind of my going in hypothesis there. I want to just kind of take this a little bit clockwise, and maybe we'll start over here with church community, any kind of social clubs, things like that, and talk about those for just a little bit, and then kind of work our way around at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and maybe come together with some experiments that we can run or things we've done to help inspire you in your journey. So with that, MC, I know you've got some groups that you meet with regularly on that one.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Again, it's back to the pandemic, unfortunately. But for us, we found within my church congregation, I've got a group of close guy friends. We're all buds, and we didn't have ways to get together. And it was like, well, we've got to do something. And sure enough, thank Zoom, and we brought ourselves together. We get together weekly for a social event, and we all talk about everything from politics to church activities. It's great, but it's a sense of community, and we've been able to sustain that for these last several weeks.
Yeah, and I think that's critical. Like, you cannot have a political discussion on social media today and actually get anywhere with it. But having a group where maybe there's different opinions that you could kind of get into and discuss, what are pros and cons of take your social issue for the day. Having a safe place, a group like that, I think is absolutely critical. I'm curious, how many people are in that group? Is it like 20 people, 2 people, somewhere in the middle?
It's a group of 6 to 8, and they float. So it's a tight group, and it allows, and we're all good friends, and it's a safe space, and we talk about a little bit of everything.
Yeah, man, that aligns real close with the classic 7 ±2 kind of ideal size for a team on that. Very cool. I'm in the International Mountain Bike Association, and that kind of my local chapter, the Roswell Area Mountain Bike Crew, and I'd say that a lot of those are personal relationships that you have just around something that you're familiar with, an affinity. We're all into mountain biking, so we can kind of chat that. But those have become actually meaningful relationships for me. I think the older I get, the harder it is to have deep friends. So much is distracting you in life, kids, all that kind of stuff. It's cool to have something that right now there's nobody in that club that I work with, or nobody that's asking me Agile questions while we're out on a ride. And it's nice to have that area. So kind of personal stuff that tends to be working out fairly well. Just moving around the bend here, meetups in general. So there's several, I'm just curious, Jackie, MC, ones that you go to that we're not going to talk about here. I know there's a lot around Atlanta area. Anything come to mind meetup wise? I think a lot of these start out professional, at least in my thing. Like, I'm going to go to something Agile related on that. And that's, to me, that's kind of where a lot of those have stayed. To a degree, like, we're coming into something professional. A lot of the meetups will have some kind of a speaker. So I feel like it's more like one-way conversation. Like, I'm going to listen to the speaker with maybe a little bit of social time at the beginning or end. But I haven't had a lot of those progress further outside of that. What about you guys? Any experiences there different than mine?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different experience, specifically being one of the co-organizers for Women in Agile. It actually started out, I attended a Women in Agile conference that precedes the Agile Alliance conference, and saw some friends, and then they encouraged me to start a local Women in Agile Atlanta chapter. So then it went from personal to professional. And then from that professional, that intersect of personal and professional, I have subsequently, out of that overlap, ended up working with a lot of those people that I've met or connected with in Women in Agile. So definitely that's been a little bit of a different path for me. And to your point, Danny, about a lot of those meetups being, you attend, someone speaking to you, you have social at the beginning and the end. The pandemic has set us to a challenge to shake that up a little bit. So a lot of our meetups, the one we had recently, we had no PowerPoint. The presenter used, stickies and index cards, and we did breakout rooms in Zoom and things like that. So yeah, definitely all 3 of those have happened for me out of a personal to a professional to a workplace. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Jackie, maybe just speak for a little bit. So there are plenty of Agile meetups out there, right, that are open to or openly, like, they don't specify a gender, right? But Women in Agile does specify a gender. What what kind of makes that meaningful? Like, how's that been different? Pros and cons of that.
I will speak from being a woman. A lot of times, specifically with these Agile events or conferences or webinars or blogs, we were experiencing that we would attend these and we wouldn't see a lot of women speakers. And I think that's just a little bit of a difference between men and women. We tend to be a little bit more subdued. We often think we're not qualified. So it was really a way to bring together all the community, including men, to help promote and help women have a place to practice, have a place to show up, get some mentorship. So even though it's women in Agile, we welcome everyone. It's just, our manifesto is just a community to encourage more women to participate, and it creates a safe space for women, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I believe that holds true. Like sometimes if you have this big shotgun approach to we're gonna be all things to everybody, it can take a lot longer to find meaningful friendships. But having some kind of affinity right up front can drive that connective stuff a little bit more. And MC, you mentioned one that you're in, this kind of next one. So a LinkedIn group, which is a little different than a meetup. And it's called Melanated Agile. Talk a little about what's going on there, what that's about, and how that forum, that medium, the LinkedIn group is a little different than some of the other groups too.
For me, it's a nice blend. Jackie was good enough to forward an invitation to join this particular group. We've got Agilists here from all over the country, possibly even all over the world. And we'll get together and talk. And again, it's about safe space. It is about community. There are certain things that we can talk about and we can all relate to very easily that would be harder in a different forum. I attended and they use a word and I can't think of it. It's like a meetup, but it was over lunch. And what I thought was going to be roughly an hour, I was there for at least an hour and a half or more and enjoyed every moment of it because the conversation was rich. And I learned a lot just by listening and hearing other people's perspectives, like, aha, and oh, yes. And so it was really good. And it helped me through my day.
Yeah. And so MC, on that one, I think that one started out kind of, hey, let's professional network, certainly around Agile is kind of what the title is. And you've been a part of that one. How long? It's not been long, like weeks.
Not very long. Yeah, not very long at all. It's just several weeks, and it's heading toward that personal category because I can see that the folks that are there are good people and will have opportunities. And some of them obviously are in Atlanta, and so it creates a greater opportunity to blend into that personal category.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Good stuff. So next up, Agile Octane in general. This was an experiment that me and my wife kind of dreamed up over Christmas a couple years ago. We were hanging out with some time off work, and I was just kind of frustrated. It was really hard to have meaningful conversations across international borders, things like that, and just had some goofy ideas that I wanted to try out. So we spun up Agile Octane to do that. And as it relates to community, we were really into trying to stand up small group communities of practice, primarily via Zoom. So we'd have a Scrum Master community of practice or an Agile Transformation Leader community of practice, things like that. And I think many of you here today, we probably actually met in that forum. I know MC, that's kind of where we really kind of kicked off our friendship, was through that. And so that one has turned into, by focusing it a little bit more, we were focusing on like key Agile roles. So there was product owner, Scrum Master, Agile coach, things like that. Some of those, not all of those, but some of those have blended into personal friendships. And one thing that hasn't happened super awesome with that I want to see, I want to try out a little bit more is, in a lot of those meetings, it's different people. Like I usually limit those Zoom to like 12 people max. But it tends to be a different 12 every time. And so I think it could be richer and certainly bridge more into personal, or maybe even into workplace, to Jackie's point, whereas we journey together, we'd figure out how to work together as well. If we had a consistent group. So I'm trying to come up with some experiments to do that. Maybe like having some skin in the game, something like that. We can kind of talk about that as we get into what we want to experiment with. But that's kind of been an interesting thing where you have Scrum Masters from a variety of companies come together. I think it's been, or certain roles. I'm leaning on Scrum Masters heavy today for some reason. I don't know why, but Scrum Masters on the brain. But with that one, I think I think it's been pretty meaningful having those conversations, getting together, building friendships on in that space. The other piece of that is Agile Octane. We do have our own Slack workspace, which is kind of interesting. It's definitely a professional, like, hey, ask your Agile question and somebody there will answer it, or job postings, things like that. Don't forget to attend this conference. But I found that it's not been like super used for an Agile forum. It's mainly like if I look at it, it's mainly because I'm getting pinged on a one-on-one conversation. So it tends to be an easier platform. A lot of us are already in Slack for work anyway, and it tends to be an easy place just to grab people and say, hey, quick question for you, instead of logging into my personal Gmail account and wondering if I have MC's right email address or something like that. I can just easily jump into that Slack community. So it's definitely enabled a lot more personal communication and conversation through that one. Maybe not as much professional as I thought it was initially. Good stuff. Facebook group. Any of you guys in any kind of Facebook groups? I guess there are those that are personal, hey, I want to be the mountain biker local Facebook group. And I've seen some that are professional. Any experiences you guys have with either of those?
I do have one. It's Heart of Agile. They have a pretty active group that's out there, and people post pretty regularly. So that's a nice professional aspect, and they're using that platform.
Yeah, I'm part of one for Modern Agile, Josh Karefsky, out of Industrial Logic. They have a Facebook page where people exchange ideas. It's a lot of general Agile stuff, but yeah, I'm part of a couple on Facebook, but that's the one I participate in most.
Yeah, any particular pros, cons, or ones you'd like? How's that experience different than some of the other experiences we've talked about?
I will say it's different in that it's a lot more people. There are hundreds and hundreds of people in these groups. They start out being somewhat focused and then over time become kind of general. So there's a connection because I'm interested in that topic, but I often don't always feel the community as much, right? Because it is so many disconnected people. So sometimes I go, if I remember a comment and I'm looking for information, but community-wise, it's really just more professional.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's been my experience too, Jackie, where I'll join those and it's like all this hope of like, oh, this is going to be great. Kindred spirits will get out there. And then it tends to be the same question asked over and over again by, somebody new comes in. And I end up just kind of like scrolling, sifting the sand, trying to figure out what's something that's actually exciting and engaging on that. Awesome. Okay, this next one is my best attempt at a symbol to represent your personal team at work, your Scrum team, things like that. So I think oftentimes these certainly start out in the workplace zone. And the idea there, my thought is that some of your best friends could be already on your Scrum team if you're running Scrum, or maybe you're running Kanban with, things like that. So in your experience, how has that been community? Where have you seen it work well, not work well? What are some trends on that? And especially, I'm imagining there's several on the call that are in some sort of a leadership role, loosely defined, that they could influence their team to actually positive ends. What would be some recommendations you'd give them to help grow that real community there?
Well, I would say, for me, and I think there are a couple of folks that are in this session today that I've worked with in the past and consider dear friends. So we've, clearly moved from the workplace into the personal. But I think more at a true professional level, within my company, we swapped out vendors that were performing, development and testing work, that sort of stuff. And that happened mid 2019. And amid all of that change and all of that chaos, the team that I worked with primarily stayed together. We lost one or two people. And that was because we were closely bonded together. We had formed that community. They knew what was happening. They knew that their days were numbered. They even went so far as to help cross-train and create the KT sessions for the incoming folks. And that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been in that crossover area.
Yeah, MC, that's a great success story. I have some experiences of learning from failures, creating communities of practice within organizations that were heavily run by either coaches or leaders, where initially, we'd get a great turnout and everyone was enthused, but over time, we would see a drop off because there really wasn't a sense of ownership from the practitioners, whether it be UI developers, whether it be Scrum Masters, whether it be product owners. And so that was a huge learning lesson early on when I was trying to create communities of practice, to make sure the practice is owned and the agenda is prioritized by those practitioners. Otherwise, it becomes somewhat of a chore. Again, you are the leader, or the coach is the sole person responsible to, prioritizing the topic, getting a speaker, and you'd often feel dejected when, one or two or no people showed up. So that was a learning lesson for me early on when trying to bring communities together.
Yeah. I see that happen a lot with internal communities practice. I was just talking with a friend last week who's kicking off a new guild at his place of work, and there's a lot of energy behind it. Like, there's been kind of this gradual stirring of, man, we need something that crosses business units, and finally, like, a leader recognized that and gave them the green light to do it. So of course, they're throwing a lot of energy and time into getting that community practice stood up, and so they're expecting like loads of people to come, 50 people, whatever. And I have seen, like, after about between 3 and 5 iterations of that, like if you meet once a month, generally about month 3 or 5, it becomes a real chore. And we got to find a speaker, or who's going to order the food, or, what are we going to do? And those things kind of fizzle out after a while. So I think the big thing there, as we kind of talk about what you can do different, but keeping stuff simple, I think there's like diminishing returns for a lot of those I's you dot and T's you cross to make it super, super special. It just takes a lot of energy, and I don't know that the benefits there. Like having a safe space to talk and grow friendships is key. Back to just the team, just to revisit that before we move on too far. But I do think a lot of those key things that you hear about in Scrum Master class, like, hey, your ideal story is not worked on by one single person. Like, this isn't an individual task list that we can all, in the daily stand-up filter by MC, and he reads his stuff and everybody else sleeps till their name's called, and they read their stuff and everybody else sleeps till their name's. Like, that anti-pattern is a real anti-pattern for a number of reasons. One, you're just not sharing knowledge, but another, you're actually not building the relationships that you could possibly build. And as you're not working on stuff together, when that stuff gets done, you're not celebrating together either. It becomes individual things that get done. So I think a lot of those core things that you would have heard about in your Scrum Master class, whenever you had the chance to take one of those, are actually part of the reason they're there. Part of the value is that they're driving you towards actually personal interconnection, personal engagement, or professional interconnection, professional engagement. And that's what makes those things meaningful. And we've all been a part of teams that are, I still have friends from teams in the past, and then I've been a part of other teams I couldn't wait to get out of. And so I think that's a key part of it, is how deep in community you're going. So that we've kind of gone around the clock dial here. Quick look over at the chat. Any questions coming in or things you guys want to explore further?
I see some comments. There's one from Nat that says, first comment said, need a clear purpose to ensure the community sustains and grassroots movement is better, in recognition of the initiators and connectors would help. And then also a follow-up comment, sharing nano practices are also helpful. Every topic need not be 30 minutes or an hour long, almost like lean coffee.
Yeah. I think variety is key and all that kind of stuff. And Matt, I appreciate the deal there, that there needs to be some kind of vision, and maybe explicitly saying that is not a bad way to start. Even on this talk, I kind of tried to set that up like, hey, you may not get like, a realization of, this is a brand new idea nobody's ever talked about, or you had no realization, but hopefully you'll get this out of it. You'll get the inspiration to try something new, setting that expectation. And even if you're kicking off this new guild, hey guys, we may not have a brand new speaker that challenges our thought every single time, but hopefully after a year, we've developed some friendships that will allow us to sustain our role and grow our role. Maybe explicitly calling out what that is, and heck, even having the community come up with what that goal is. Like, what do you guys want to get out of this? And I think that ties in with your grassroots of what do we want to get out of it? How are we going to do it together? Yeah, awesome. Any other comments you see in there? Anyone else want to chime in something real quick? Just feel free to type away.
From Jerry, who's one of my colleagues at Pfizer and has been a person who's really been a champion for change and starting up some really awesome communities of practice at our organization. She has here lean coffee, open space is my favorite. Perhaps have that as a regular part of the cadence of your COP. Yeah, that's a great one right there.
Yeah, I love lean coffees because you know it's relevant to at least somebody in the room. You know, like that always helps. And if you're voting on it together, you kind of collectively acknowledge, well, this is a topic we want to talk about. You know, I love that concept. The one challenge with lean coffee is sometimes it's hard to go deep because you may not be on guard. Like there's been several lean coffees I've attended where it's like, man, I should have brought that out now that I've had more time to think about it. So it's probably good to have some kind of balance as you go. And I think variety is the spice of life. You know, you really got to mix it up on that one. So I love the notion of lean coffee for that. That's awesome. Great bringing that out.
And Rob kind of has a comment here to piggyback on that. Rotating duties is important. People get burned out. Enabling others to lead is important. See Doc's keynote, great way to reference that. A rotation creates a strong, reinforced culture.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Great point, Rob. Totally agree. Awesome. Any other noteworthy stuff you guys want to add in? And hey, I really do. I know it's a little cumbersome to do the chat, but you guys, if you've ever been in a talk I've done, I totally enjoy conversations way more than lectures. So while it's hard to do, it's at least a thread, a potential for that. So I appreciate you doing that.
Danny, it says all attendees can choose to unmute. So
oh, cool. Okay, great. Yeah. So if you want to jump in, feel free. Just, you probably don't want to jump in if you're near something noisy. Or if you do, mute and unmute real quick. That'd be about it. Awesome. Cool. That's great. So yeah, feel free to unmute anytime. Yeah, MC.
Danny, the one thing I was going to add, as we were talking about community here, and as we listened to the keynote this morning, the essence of Doc's presentation was around community. It was amazing. I was like, holy smokes. And he had no idea that, we were going to be focusing in this way and to go from one neighborhood to the next. He was building community. It was great.
Yeah, it was a good opening band for us. We ought to give him kudos for that. It's good. Awesome. Cool. So where we want to go next, and again, you guys will probably have just as good insights as us. So this can be a community developed content section here, but last little bit that we want to talk through is just some practical takeaways, some things that you could kind of do. And really kind of where I'm going with that is view all of this just like we do the products we develop. It's an experiment, right? You have a hypothesis, some outcome you're trying to achieve, and maybe there's a means to get there. And so what are some ways that we can experiment together? So if you're looking for more content, this is it. We just want to speak to this slide a little bit and talk about some experiments that we think are important, or some skills as you're experimenting that we think are important. So the first thing I'd throw out, just to kind of get the conversation warmed up, is realizing small isn't bad. I think a lot of times in our culture, we associate big things or important things, and unless you have 50 people at your meetup, it must not be a very good meetup, or you'll always get those days when you schedule the thing and like only a handful of people show up and it's like, oh man, this must not have been as awesome as it was last time. But I'd say small isn't bad. And if you think about it in the way of internal community practice, I've done some. When I was at Equifax, we had a big meeting called Scrum Masters Unite. We had lunch. It was this really big kind of rah-rah session. And it was kind of a blast, a lot of work to pull off, but a blast. But I think the most meaningful stuff happened in smaller groups of 2s and 3s, where I got together with peers of mine and we had lunch, whatever it was, every other week or something like that. So there's pros and cons to that, right? Like a lot of really incredible things come out of small groups. So don't minimize the value of small. And the other advantage of small is it's way easier to do. Like when I met with 2 or 3 peers at Equifax, like, we just had to put lunch on the calendar and we showed up at the cafeteria and ate lunch. When we met with all the Scrum Masters Unite, 50 people deal, it was a lot bigger thing to plan. I had to get budget approved and somebody's going to be mad about lunch. So I had to figure out, all the different variations on a lunch theme. And then had to have a relevant speaker and a room set up and background music and a screen. It was just a lot more overhead, which made it more of a chore. So I just want to say, if you're experimenting, small's not bad. Give it a go. Other experiments, things you want to get into, folks?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak. The experiment piece is really important. And I cannot emphasize that enough. with the teams out there. As you go into those experiments, though, make sure you have those victory conditions kind of defined as you go into the experiment. What are the key levers that you want to affect? Are we trying to get more inclusion? Are we trying to get more people to speak up? Set those goals first, then go ahead and peel off and have, like, was mentioned earlier, small experiments, right? You don't want to waste a lot of money, time, effort on an experiment. You want to do just enough. It's not A, B, C, D, F. Think of it as just a pass-fail grade.
Yeah, man, Rob, great. Thanks for chiming in too and taking the courage to come off mute there, man. Thanks for that perspective.
Danny, I was going to kind of add, I talked about procrastination before, but the counterbalance to that is get involved. Whether you're doing the meetup groups, but because I've had some time in my hands, I've joined meetup groups in South Florida, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Denver. Whether you're doing that or, even something like, what Agile Octane is doing with the new Scrum Masters Unite community, that the paid subscription, get involved. It really makes it more worthwhile and meaningful when you're actually out there and doing something.
It's critical. The communities I've done in the past, when I'm trying to build that, there's always those people that complain, like, oh man, pizza again, what's the deal, or whatever. There's always somebody like that, right? Something to complain about. And what I found, if I want to stop the complainer person, I'd ask them to be on the leadership team, which seems maybe counterintuitive. Like, why do you want some, EOR on your leadership team? But it's amazing the change that would do. It's like, okay, we're planning out dinner. You complained about pizza. Guess what? You get to plan it this time. What's it going to be? And instantly, like, the complaining stops and they start to get invested. It's like, oh man, I have a chance to kind of shape our future. Let's go for it and do it. And so I would say if you're in that mode, and one of your reasons for challenges in being communities, I'm not getting much out of it as well, that it definitely helps to get involved, find somebody. And heck, if you can't find anyone to let you get involved, maybe you've got a bunch of folks that are control freaks, get involved with what me and MC are doing over at Agile Octane. We're happy to have you be involved in the leadership team. There's plenty of places to plug in and run some experiments over on that. So definitely doing that. And I think that's where you find more meaning. Like the groups that I've just attended over time, it's like, if something comes up, maybe it's not, I'll not go that week or whatever. But if I'm actually involved in shaping it somehow, man, it's like way more meaningful, and I'm certainly going to be there.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. In this current climate, we're all Agilists, and we always love to have face-to-face communication. I have heard from people, I go to these meetups and it's not the same, being in front of a video camera, but this is pretty much life as it's going to be for a while. So I encourage people to embrace remote. There are so many different tools that you can use, use the breakout room features. Even in MS Teams, you can create a team and have different rooms, encourage people to turn their cameras on, or if you want to break people in slowly, and you're meeting, even on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and there are people who are averse to signing on their cameras, make an announcement that at least one meeting will be a camera meeting to ease people in slowly. Embrace some of the really great collaboration tools. There's Miro and Mural, even Slack. We're using several of those different tools today, and, mix it up. You can be low tech. You can show up and, write really big words on, some sticky sheets and, have other people participate, change out your background. I'm on the top of the world today. So, I just wanted to put those things out there, and to piggyback on what both MC and Danny said, get involved, become a co-organizer. One of the things I learned very quickly up front is that I can't do it all on my own. You create a sense of community by even having other co-organizers, because you create, that group that you can lean on. Yeah, sometimes you get burnt out. Yeah, sometimes you don't want to go, but if there are 2 or 3 other people who are co-organizers, they can take up that slack for you. So I'm going to put a shout out to Women in Agile Atlanta is looking for more co-organizers. So you can hit me up if you're interested in doing that.
That is awesome. I have a kilt. Can I be an organizer if I wear my kilt? I'm just joking.
Yes, and males are welcome. A lot. Even at the national board level, we have men on the board. So yes,
that is awesome.
Allies.
I'm just having to have a bad joke, it's like my dad's sign. MC, I have one thing I wanted to bring out. Like, we were having a conversation a week ago about remote meetups, and you had done some interesting stuff. I thought the group might like to kind of hear about that and learn from your experience. But you were starting to attend some meetups in other cities, which prior to COVID and remote meetups, that was like unheard of. I mean, heck, meetup required a location, a geography, and based everything off that. Talk a little bit. Tell the group a little bit about what you've been doing there.
Sure. That for me, that has helped to break the monotony and preventing the rut. It was just kind of a lark that kind of dawned on me at a point once we hit that point in the pandemic, and realizing that everyone has to move to this medium. It really opens it up. And for me, what I've done and been able to use this for is to hear new and different presenters. I listened to a presenter last night from Agile Denver. It was a little late, but it was a great session. She had a lot to say. And the thing is, it's not necessarily that it was some new revelation or something like that, but it's a different presenter sharing the information with you in a different way. And there are times when you can take that in, hearing it from different people. I've participated in sessions, Agile London, one of the groups in Scotland that has a big Agile following. Meetup has been a tremendous source of information for me, and I've learned so much.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, we are all in a culture, right? And you don't realize it when you're in it. It's like an accent. I don't have an accent. Everybody else has an accent, right? And so when you get into other cultures, you kind of realize, man, something's really different. And I've had the chance to get to coach teams around the globe and do trainings and stuff like that. And I will tell you, it is different launching a Scrum team in Ireland versus Costa Rica versus Australia versus India. It really is. And the cultures are different. And every one of those cultures, not like one culture is better or worse. They all have different things to offer and different challenges that they're presented with. And so getting that cross-pollination, even in a remote fashion, is pretty cool to keep you sharp and keep you learning. Other thoughts? Anyone in the audience have thoughts? And we can kind of move on in to kind of combine it with Q&A. And I know, Kimberly, we wrap up in about 7 minutes, so we're on track for that. But yeah, other thoughts, questions, experiments you guys are interested in running? And you could do the chat, or I think you can unmute. Either way you want to go on that.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. Yeah, I just had to add, I'm so jazzed about what we were just talking about here, amongst everything else. But I have probably spent about 20 hours the last 2 weeks going to meetups in different cities and new communities. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to hear the different perspectives and learn and bring those into my community and into my workplace. So it's just brought me a new sense of enlightenment and really inspired me to bring some new things into my organization. So I just can't stress enough about what amazing opportunities there are right now with COVID and being able to just hop into all these sessions virtually. I don't live in Atlanta, folks, so I'm loving that I get to attend this today. So just wanted to reiterate on that. That's all.
That's awesome, Jerry. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah,
and can I put you on the spot for just a minute? And you can always just
Sure.
or put on mute, pretend your connection faded away. But I'm curious, like, is there, like, as you attended those meetups, was there like a topic or something, like a little takeaway that you had that you came back and shared, like a practical little story that you'd want to share?
Right now, what I am learning in some of the communities, and one in particular, is that looking at things through the lens of our Black colleagues and some of the things that they're experiencing, and being very keen and aware about diversity and inclusion, and talking with fellow Agile coaches and teams about that, bringing that specifically into our environment and creating open dialogue. So that's something I've done just recently.
That is so awesome. Very cool. Thanks for sharing. And I think so often when we get wrapped up in our own culture, whatever that culture is, we assume everybody's culture is the same. And so whether it's geographically or whatever the diversity component is, it's really interesting to do that. I think there's lots of diversity out there, right? Racial diversity is what we always think about, but there's socioeconomic, gender, all kinds of different diversity. And it's interesting to kind of get out of your rut. on that one. So very cool to kind of explore those different angles. Thanks, Jerry, for sharing. Anyone else
Sure.
have a thought, something you'd want to share or a question you'd have? Kind of open mic time here. Plug your community if you want to do that. Cool. Hey, I really appreciate everyone's time today. And I know we're like almost out of time. We're down to like our final 4 minutes here. But what I want to encourage you to do, just kind of my last little thing to implore you is I would contend like our little topic beginning here, that I think if you wanted like the one thing that's going to impact your personal satisfaction and your professional success the most, I think community might be that thing. And so Rob's point earlier was like, hey, this is all just a prioritization discussion, isn't it? I mean, I'm oversimplifying what you said earlier, Rob, but kind of all these things tie into prioritization. I think that's largely true. And so I would just encourage you, don't put this on the back burner. Don't think, oh man, I'll focus on it later when I really need it. The time to focus on it is when you can have something to give, you're able to participate and let that be in there. It's hard to create community overnight. It's really, really hard. It's something you gradually kind of build over time. And the more you put into it, the more meaningful it is. So there's a lot of different experiments you can try. Again, we went through a handful and certainly invite you to join any of those. We'll throw some links on the little Slack channel there as we wrap up. But just get out there, try something, do something, reach out to someone and begin taking that first step. And I think you'll see each step builds on itself and continues to reap dividends.
I think that's really good, Danny. I want everyone to think about this. You only have so many hours on a given week, right? And when we talk about prioritization, this is what we're talking about. You need to think of all the activities that you're doing, both within your work, your family, your community, within your spiritual, how you focus in a spiritual way. You need to think of it as a portfolio, and you need to go ahead and allocate hours to each of these buckets. And when it comes to your community, this is where you need to say, look, I have to make sure I'm staying plugged in with my community because I get a lot of fulfillment and needs met from that space. You cannot let these other buckets monopolize over each of these very important 4 quadrants.
Yeah, Rob, very true. I'm curious, in your personal life with your family, what tool do you use to run Scrum? I'm just joking.
I actually do. Don't get me started.
Yeah, me need to. I'm just joking. Yeah. I mean, I think all those principles help. You got limited capacity. It's a prioritization discussion. Awesome. Well, Kimberly, I think that wraps up our time. Do you want to round us out?
Hey everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to join today. If you didn't see, we did give you an opportunity to connect further with both Danny, MC, and Jackie through LinkedIn for any further conversation. So that's in the chat. We'll add that also as well to the Slack channel. Thank you guys so much, and ultimately for the advice of helping us build this community that only makes us stronger all. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for letting us be a part of it. Thanks, MC, Jackie.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great morning.